We'll move on to item 6.
Item 6A, hold a public hearing, waive first reading, and introduce an ordinance to amend and replace San Bruno Municipal Code Title 12, Land Use Article 3 Zoning, Chapter 12.100, Off-Street Parking and Loading, and amend Chapters 12.92, 12.96, and 12.200, and adopt the associated parking design standards resolution and parking fee resolution.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor and members of the City Council. My name is Darcy Smith, and I'm the City Community and Economic Development Director. And tonight I'll be giving you a brief introduction to this item. This is a public hearing on the city's proposed new parking regulations, which consist of an ordinance that will amend the zoning article of the municipal code and the associated parking design standards resolution and parking fee resolution. So I'll be making this presentation along with the city's lead contractor on this effort, Kelly Beggs from Good City Company. Also in attendance tonight from the project team who can assist in answering any questions or clarifying any information presented is Pamela Wu, the city's planning and housing manager, and Jason Moody, the managing principal from Economic and Planning Systems, who provide the economic analysis. And additionally, given this long and lengthy effort involving many city departments, I just want to acknowledge the work from the public works staff, especially on the parking design standards resolution, and the city attorney, Mark Zaffarano. The objective for this item tonight is to hold this public hearing, and the staff's recommendation is to introduce the ordinance and adopt the associated resolutions. There's many objectives of this work, so I just wanted to highlight some of them now, and you'll hear them interwoven throughout the presentation tonight. It started over a year ago when the City Council asked the staff to examine the transit corridor parking standards and look at revising those. And that was followed up by a community town hall held here when we discussed parking and brainstormed some new strategies around increasing off-street parking in residential neighborhoods to ease some of the parking pressures in those areas. The City Council also adopted the Downtown Parking Management Plan, which identified the long-term strategy of increasing parking supply in the downtown through a parking garage and funding that in part through the new parking in lieu fees, which are presented tonight in the parking fee resolution for consideration. That's interrelated to the city's significant interest in downtown economic revitalization. And we really are optimistic, and hopefully these regulations really pave the way for that to happen. The city's been undertaking other efforts to address parking, such as the recently adopted revised residential parking permit program. So I've touched on some of those key objectives, but I think you'll see clearly tonight just the breadth of this effort, why so much time was involved, why so many departments were involved, and the real purpose of it to both the residents of this community and the business community. So with that, I'll turn the presentation over to Kelly Beggs. She'll provide the background, an overview of the ordinance and resolution, summarize the City Council study session that was held on January 28th, and any minor modifications that were made to the ordinance that you saw then and the resolution, and end with tonight's recommendation to the City Council.
Good evening. I'm Kelly Beggs, Senior Planner with Good City Company, and I'm pleased to be here before you again to present the ordinance to Council this evening. I will be repeating some information from my previous presentation to Council on January 28th, as I do recognize that there may be new members of the public in the audience this evening. So to start off with some background, this slide shows the timeline of how the ordinance update was initiated and how feedback from Council, Planning Commission, and the public fed into the process. The ordinance update began, as Darcy said, with direction from City Council to revise the proposed TCP parking standards, and then continued with a public town hall meeting on parking issues in San Bruno from a resident's perspective. In December, Planning Commission recommended that Council adopt the ordinance and resolution unanimously. And lastly, 2 weeks ago, Council reviewed and provided feedback on the ordinance and resolution. Next, I'll provide a brief overview of the ordinance and the resolutions. I'll note that there are 3 separate documents for review. The first document is the ordinance, which contains zoning standards that regulate off-street parking and loading. Next, there's a parking design standards resolution, which includes traditional parking design standards and mechanical and automated parking design standards. And then lastly, there's a parking fee resolution, which outlines the fee amount for the in lieu fee and the parking compliance permit. And some of this information has been separated into resolutions that facilitate updating standards that change more frequently due to technological and design innovation. So to start off with that first document, the ordinance applies to new construction, enlargements to existing buildings, and changes of land use in existing buildings. It will replace the existing parking chapter and amend other sections of the code to resolve conflicts between the proposed ordinance and existing municipal code. Some key features of the ordinance. The ordinance regulates the minimum vehicle parking and loading spaces, as well as parking spaces for motorcycles, scooters, and bicycle parking. Landscaping requirements for parking areas are set forth, and transportation demand management and parking management plan requirements are also included. This slide reviews the objectives of the ordinance. The proposed ordinance includes updated standards designed to be both resident and business friendly. It also includes regulations that aim to increase off-street parking for residential areas, facilitate economic revitalization in the downtown, and implement policies of the city's long-range planning documents. The next 2 slides provide examples of the updated parking standards for major land use categories. As you'll see, the organization has been streamlined to make the chapter more reader-friendly. This slide shows the required citywide off-street parking for residential land uses, which have been revised to be consistent with council direction regarding more conservative TCP parking standards, and then also to be consistent with state density bonus law. This slide shows the required off-street parking for major non-residential land uses. As you can see, one category on the far left can cover multiple similar land uses. And then on the right side, the number of required parking spaces is shown and sets forth the number of spaces required per square foot of floor area. Non-residential land uses located in specific plan areas, such as the TCP area, can also reduce this required amount of parking by 10% with implementation of a TDM plan and a parking management plan. This slide outlines some strategies to increase supply of off-street parking in residential areas. Many older homes in San Bruno cannot fit a modern vehicle in existing garages and driveways, and these strategies aim to remedy those issues. The bulleted strategies would allow property owners with non-conforming garages and driveway depths to bring one of those elements into conformance to fit a modern vehicle and to help alleviate that demand for on-street parking by moving more vehicles onto private properties. Now I'll move on to the economic revitalization objective. These exemptions apply to buildings in the central business district that are constructed prior to 2005, as the property owners in these buildings have paid into a parking assessment district, which existed from the late 1980s to the mid-2000s, and that parking assessment district funded the existing surface parking lots that you see downtown. With this exemption, no additional off-street parking or in lieu fee would be required for the first 2,500 square foot of any change in use to a more intensive use. So for example, that would be something like a retail space to a gym, which has a higher parking requirement, or a retail space to a cafe. The provision is intended to encourage the establishment of small businesses in existing vacant and underutilized buildings downtown. Another policy that will facilitate economic revitalization is the parking in lieu fee. The fee would apply to non-residential land uses located in specific plan areas, and property owners could pay the fee on a per space basis in lieu of providing off-street parking for up to 30% of required parking spaces. This slide presents the recommended fee amounts for different specific plan areas. Staff recommends a sliding scale for specific plan areas not including the Bay Hill specific plan area, and the sliding scale is designed to facilitate the resolution of small parking deficits and then to disincentivize the resolution of larger parking deficits. A fee of $60,000 per space is feasible for the Bay Hill specific plan area, as you'll see on this slide, and that's due to higher land values and the elevated cost of constructing an underground parking garage, which is required for a variety of reasons in this area. I will point out that there is an additional fee on this slide, which is highlighted in the black box, and that's included for office land uses in specific plan areas, excluding the Bay Hill. The fee is a flat per space fee of $25,000 for office land uses. And after an additional analysis, staff has found that office uses can generate higher rents than other non-residential land uses and can support a higher fee than the sliding scale amounts originally proposed. The in lieu fee amount and the parking compliance permit fee is included in this parking fee resolution, which is attachment 3 to your staff report. And then on to the last objective, implementation of the city's long-range planning documents. So this has also been a key goal of the ordinance update, especially as the city is required to implement certain housing element policies to maintain its housing element certification. In particular, I'll point out that the ordinance will implement important policies in the housing element, especially housing element program 3H, and it does that by updating residential parking standards pursuant to the state density bonus law requirements and allowing tandem parking. This ordinance implements other policies of the general plan, the TCP, and the housing element, and those are summarized in detail in attachment 5 to the staff report. The parking design standards resolution is one of the other resolution documents that you have, and that's a separate document from the ordinance. It includes design standards for parking spaces and lots, as well as mechanical and automated parking standards. And mechanical and automated parking is an area of emerging technology that staff expects continual evolution and innovation in. The resolution specifies operational performance standards for mechanical and automated parking that cover items like maintenance, inspection, and availability of vehicles to ensure that these structures are truly functional and long-lasting. So next I'll summarize our January 28th, 2020 meeting. So some key study session topics that were discussed include the maximum amount of required off-street parking that can be provided in mechanical and automated parking facilities, tandem parking for customers of businesses, and the parking in lieu fee amounts. So in response to public comment urging council to consider higher maximums for off-street parking allowed in mechanical parking structures, council did ask staff to explain why there were limits imposed on how many of the required off-street parking spaces can be accommodated in these facilities. And staff responded that some drivers will be reluctant or unable to use mechanical parking facilities due to the delay associated in vehicle access, the novelty of the technology, and then also the physical inability to fit a larger SUV within some of these structures. However, if valet assistance is provided, the issues with the delay and the new technology would be alleviated, so staff has revised the limit to a maximum of 75% if valet assistance is provided. If no valet assistance is provided, the limit would be 50%, which is no change from the previous version of this document. Council also urged staff to consider the recommendation of Planning Commission to allow tandem parking for customers of businesses with valet assistance. And similar to mechanical parking, tandem configurations for customer parking could be functional if there is valet assistance provided. So the ordinance now does allow that if valet assistance is provided. And then lastly, in response to public comment about the difference in fee amounts between Bay Hill and other specific plan areas for the parking in lieu fee, there was a discussion at the last meeting, and staff did respond that the higher land values in the Bay Hill area can support the higher in lieu fee. Staff is proposing no change to the Bay Hill fee, but as we discussed earlier, there is one additional fee for office land uses in other specific plan areas that are not the Bay Hill. So other final revisions of notes include the addition of vehicle and bicycle parking standards for emergency shelters, and that change was made to provide additional consistency with state law. And then the additional in lieu fee of $25,000 for office land uses. I'll move on to tonight's action. In conclusion, City Council is requested to take action tonight to hold the public hearing, waive the first reading, and introduce an ordinance to amend and replace San Bruno Municipal Code Title 12, Article 3, Chapter 12.100, and amend Chapters 12.92, 12.96, and 12.200, and adopt the associated parking design standards resolution and parking fee resolution. This concludes my presentation. I'm available to answer any questions that you may have, as are other consultants and staff.
Thank you, Kelly. While Kelly's at the mic, are there any questions for her while she's at the mic? No one? Okay. Thank you. We'll call you up if something comes up. This is a public hearing, so are there any speaker cards? Is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak? It is a public hearing. Once we close the public hearing, then it will preclude you from speaking further on the topic when it comes back to council. I have no speaker cards, but if you are wishing to speak, if you could follow behind Robert.
I didn't fill out a card. Robert Recall, 7th Avenue. At one of the previous meetings, a question came up on how do you figure the square footage of a business, because all of the business square footage is not necessarily used by the customers, so I don't know if that has been really addressed. It talks about fees per square foot, but it doesn't cover that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hamilton.
Hi, Tom Hamilton, Crestmore Drive. I'm on the Planning Commission. We sent this to you, 5-0. I've been thinking about this more since it left the Planning Commission and after the last meeting here when we talked about it regarding the in lieu fees. At the Planning Commission, I commented, on a desire to keep those fees as low as possible, thinking, about the economic revitalization plans for downtown. But in thinking about it more, with the 2,500 square foot exemption that's already in place in the ordinance for the majority of businesses downtown, most businesses are 100% covered and would never need to purchase, any or use the in lieu fee. So it might be prudent to maybe even raise it, just to encourage businesses or to provide parking, because parking is needed. Just moved a little bit on that topic, so I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Thank you. Next one, please.
Marcia Glassner on Linden Avenue. I really just kind of have a question. When you're talking about the valet assistance for the mechanical parking, whether that would be required to be free or whether there would be a charge for that, because it just seems like that would definitely, affect the acceptability of that to the people who need to park. That's all.
Thank you. Anyone else? Max?
Hi everyone, my name is Max Wayne and I'm the owner of Atlas Pizza Parlor. And yes, back to Robert's question, actually I'm going to re-emphasize on the square footage, because I have a very unique situation, because I have 6,600 square feet of space, which is I'm only using maybe 1/3, not even 1/3. And when we increase the usage for the customers, 2,500 square feet, I still don't even fall into the category. Maybe, I don't know, I'm not sure the technicality of these amendments, but I would like to get more clarification on how much square footage we can use for the customer use, and how much we can maybe get exempt on the space we use for storage or the employees use. Or the kitchen or the other side. So that I would like to get a clarification on that. How much space can we get for the customer use? So my example again, 6,600 square feet. I don't know where I'm going to fall in. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? If not, can I have a motion to close public hearing?
Through the chair, would it be possible to leave the public hearing open until we get response from staff in case that spurs any other questions from the audience? I mean, there were some questions that were posed.
I do have these down. I'm going to ask
Right.
staff to respond.
But I would prefer to have staff respond before we close the public hearing,
Okay.
if that's okay.
We'll do it at this time. It wasn't, folks, your questions were very succinct and to the point, so I think we can accommodate that, but I don't want to, where we're going to have people continue to
course.
come up and back and forth, just so we can start to tackle those. One thing I think that has come up, and it was addressed last time, but, microphone. One thing that did come up, which was addressed last time, but just for clarification, and that is on the square footage of the business, and I think that just sometimes gets a little confusing, and it's been a little bit of time. So if we could just re-clarify that, please.
Sure, I'll try to answer that. Darcy Smith, Community and Economic Development Director. The definitions for this particular ordinance are contained within the ordinance. You don't have to flip around to a different section of the municipal code, and they're quite detailed, many pages of it. And there's the floor area definition for non-restaurant uses, I'll answer that question next, is basically you measure to the outside walls. If you had shared spaces, you'd measure kind of the inside walls if you had multiple tenant spaces within a larger building, for example. And for those, we do include the storage areas and habitable spaces, but for example, like attics and basements would be excluded. For restaurants, this issue has come up of how do you count the space? We're a little different. Sometimes we have a lot of storage. Sometimes we have space we really don't use. It doesn't add more customers. It doesn't add more employees. So most cities, and we're following that sort of general trend, define restaurant square footage a little bit separately when they calculate the parking requirement, and we only count the area that is for public space, and we exclude the storage areas. So that's a special definition. And we've just found that's more accurate way to kind of estimate the parking demand associated for the customers. So there was also a question about valet assistance. So our ordinance and the associated resolutions don't specify whether a fee could be charged, but I think generally these are, when there is valet, it's usually offered to the employees. So, for example, in our conversations with YouTube, they've said it would be only for the employees only, and so they wouldn't charge a fee just because they're trying to facilitate their employees using it. And I think it would just be atypical to charge a fee. It's not a typical valet system where you're pulling up to a restaurant and someone's parking your car for you. It's something that the property owner or the tenant is doing to try to facilitate making sure they have the parking and you're using it, if that makes sense. There's also the comment about the fees, and I think you saw tonight we did take another example at just the office use, which commands higher rents, higher property values of an office building, and so we have a new fee for you to consider tonight for the office uses.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you for entertaining my
Sure.
Request. And so since I don't see anybody else standing up, then I will make a motion to close the public hearing.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion made and second to close public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? 5 voice. Okay, we'll bring it back to council for questions, comments, etc. Laura.
I just have a follow-up question, Darcy, on the measurement again. So I get it for non-businesses, for non-restaurants, it's the outside walls, but for restaurants, you said it's public space. Does that include the kitchen area, bathrooms, seating area? It's anything that...
No, so I'll read the definition. Public floor area, floor area open and accessible to customers of the business. Utility rooms, storage areas, restrooms, kitchens, and back-of-house operation areas are not included in public floor area.
Okay.
Again, that's only for restaurants because of their special layouts.
And then my other question is 2,500 square feet, just kind of get an idea. Are a lot of the small businesses on San Mateo Avenue within that 2,500 square feet?
That's our best estimate. So if you can imagine maybe 25 feet by 100 feet in depth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was what we were trying to capture with that exemption.
And any thoughts on commissioners' comments about raising those fees for?
Well, I would say these are brand new fees. So let's see how they are received we haven't had anyone running down to City Hall, I can't wait to pay those, but that's sometimes how new fees go. But I would say we should check in after we get the first few payments and see how is that playing out. So I think generally, we do look at development impact fees every few years, and we look at we're doing our master fee study update. So this is something that staff would have on the radar to reconsider in a few years.
And then just a clarifying question on, I've seen and I've heard and I've talked to, but I've never really been on site in a location where there's mechanical spaces. And I know if you go on the East Coast, they've been around for many, many, many years. In fact, I think 20 years ago, I was looking at mechanical lifts. And so it's a normal thing for them. I would assume, just like anything, it's just a matter of getting used to it. And, you'll see these mechanical spaces in parking garages, and it'll become just a norm. And it doesn't require any sort of support or direction. You get a key, you unlock it, your key unlocks a certain level that comes up, drops down, whatever, so you can either pull in, park out, or you get, I don't know, a remote, how that works. But I would say it's pretty simple that people get it, whether it's, if you're living in a building and you're residential, you're going to get it, you're going to understand it because you do it every day. But to have them in spaces where it's public parking, I don't see that.
Yeah, so you're right that this is an emerging area, and you have approved projects with it. Nothing has been built yet, but 111 San Bruno Avenue would be the first that we anticipate to be built in, and it is proposed as part of the YouTube Phase 1 project, and we're seeing increasing interest in it. We had a meeting last week with a developer who really said this is really going to make a big difference in me being able to build this project or not build it. And that's what we're hearing, especially given issues with the water table in San Bruno, which is really high, and the prohibition on above-ground parking garages in many areas of town. That said, it is more commonly accepted by a repetitive user, such as a homeowner or an apartment resident, or a repetitive office employee. You mentioned public. It would not be common in a public scenario. Although there are cities in California, such as West Hollywood, which built an entire municipal parking garage that's fully automated. That's a little different. You kind of pull in, you're actually on like a turntable that then it's really futuristic. It sucks your car in and parks it for you, and then you retrieve it on your phone and it reappears. But mechanical parking, the simplest, just an up-down lift, is sort of the more entry point that we're seeing initially here. And that with the valet assistance, especially for the car that comes in and is actually moved up, is an easier entry point. But it would not be really the public or customer or guest parking that would be sort of the initial entry. It would be more the repetitive users.
Perfect. Thank you for the clarification.
Other questions or comments from council? Linda? Linda's mic was on first.
Ladies first.
Okay.
Yeah, I just
Linda.
want to unravel this a little bit, if you can help me to unravel this a little bit more. So the $60,000 fee is going to be for the Bay Hill specific plan office space. And in the staff report, it says, as after further consideration and more detailed analysis, staff recommends revising the in lieu fee for office land use in all specific plan areas except Bay Hill. So when I looked at the Bay Hill specific plan, I just noticed the Bay Hill specific plan. So I'm trying to figure out, if you take out Bay Hill, what are we looking at that's paying $25,000?
So areas within the transit corridors plan, so not just downtown, areas within the transit corridors plan. So areas along El Camino Real, areas along San Bruno Ave, close to Barton Caltrain, where you really could have an office development that may be looking at either above ground or subterranean parking.
Okay.
When we looked at it again, office can really, there's the value there to obtain additional in lieu fee payments. Whereas we were really looking at the in lieu payments to be something to incentivize more revitalization along downtown and some of those businesses that really have a hard challenge expanding because they cannot provide the parking. The other thing that I think is important to note that we talked about last time is both the in lieu fee and mechanical parking is completely discretionary. It is not because it is allowed in a code that a building will come in and be able to do it, or a business. And so they will apply And depending on the approval body, it may be staff, it may be the planning commission, or it may be the city council, depending on what their project requests. And so we will take a look at all of the issues that we've talked about. Who are the users? Is it appropriate? Is there parking generally available in the area? Or are for their unique use, their request to fee out, it's just going to create too much of a parking issue there. And so we will absolutely look at that and evaluate that with each request.
Okay. And then as far, so just to be clear, then that's El Camino, that's all of downtown. And is there a reason that that amount is more than half the amount of the Bay Hill
Yeah.
plan?
So in Bay Hill, you cannot do above-ground parking. You have to do subterranean parking. So subterranean parking is quite a bit more, oftentimes double what it would cost. You know, it wouldn't be surprising to see figures upwards of 80 to 100 to 120,000 per space to build a subterranean parking space. And so in building the in lieu fee, you want to have the fee at a level where it is enticing to use, but not so low that there's overuse of the in lieu fee. And so that's why it is higher in Bay Hill, because the criteria around Bay Hill, where you have to do subterranean parking and the economic development prowess of Bay Hill, sort of mandates that you can charge a larger in lieu fee than some of your other areas. And in the TCP, Transit Corridors area, you can do above ground parking, and so typically it would be less.
Okay. So then if you have a business and you're at the $25,000 amount, and you said that will depend whether it's approved by staff or by the council, would now be the time that council says anything over 5,000 square feet would now be the time to make those restrictions?
I think what you're saying is if the council wanted to place a requirement that any space over 5,000 square feet to have an in lieu fee would have to come back to the city council. Is that what you're saying, or?
Well, I'm asking where the boundaries are. So at what point does staff make the determination, and at what point does city council make the determination?
Fair. So typically these are wrapped into other entitlement applications. So a brand new building that is not asking for any zoning change or variance change, the decision-making body would be the planning commission. If wrapped into those approvals, they are asking for a discretionary action of the city council. When that package comes up to you, it would be you're making a decision on the entire development, so the in lieu fee and that discretionary action. There are times where it can be a staff level decision, but it's going to be rare, far few and in between. Most of these actions we're talking about really are going to require planning commission or the city council.
Okay, thank you. For the valet services agreement, do those agreements come to the city council?
Those again are wrapped in with the other project approvals, so it would largely be planning commission or city council. Okay.
And then for the small business, I just again unraveling it, as it would help to have just an example. So if you're opening a restaurant and the restaurant is 2,500 square feet, what are the requirements off the top, starting today?
Sure. So basically what this would allow is if you're changing the use of your restaurant, and say it was previously a retail establishment and it's at or under 2,500 square feet, you would not be required to provide additional parking or to pay the in lieu fee.
Now, what if you're an existing restaurant and you're expanding?
If you're expanding, you would be required to pay the in lieu fee or provide the parking on site. That is kind of a challenging thing for many downtown business owners to do.
So is the purpose to incentivize new owners to come in? I just want to make sure we're not penalizing those who have already invested in the community.
No, I mean, it would equally apply to a new owner or an existing owner, because what we're really talking about is the use.
Okay.
And so you can have an owner that operated one building and now they want to change their use. It's not dependent on the owner.
Okay. Okay, that's it for right now. Thank you.
Michael? Yeah. And just to kind of follow up on Linda's comment, it seems to me that it wouldn't the in lieu fee wouldn't be a penalty. If anything, it would be an opportunity for businesses that have no more space to add parking to actually have a mechanism to expand their business. And as long as the numbers pan out, they would have an opportunity to grow and pay the in lieu fee, and rather than having to scrounge around and find parking. And I know that's been an issue with a lot of the businesses that have come through. So my only comment is that I think it's exciting that we have this in front of us tonight. It's been a long time coming, and looking at that timeline, how long this has been drawn out, and the amount of interaction we've had, the input from the public, and all the work that staff has put into this. I don't think I've, in my years on council, seen anything as comprehensive as this proposal. It addresses so many issues. It really tackles a lot of the things that we've been talking about for a lot of years. So I think it's really exciting that we're at this point where we can make these changes, update our municipal code, and start addressing something that's been a big issue for the community for a long, long time. So looking forward to approving this tonight.
Marty.
Thank you. So I'm looking at it a little different. Downtown's parking is difficult currently today. With the amount of vacancies that we have right now, if they were filled and they were busy, it would be almost impossible to come in, get a parking spot when you wanted to, and enjoy our downtown. So we have a downtown parking plan, and that has key elements are to put in parking meters and to build a parking garage. Okay, how are we going to pay for it? To me, when I look at what other cities are charging, $2,500 is a great incentive, but it's not accomplishing what we need to do. We need funds to build a parking garage. Millbrae has a $14,000 in lieu fee that was revised in 2015. San Carlos is raising their parking in lieu fee to $25,000 from $18,000 from a few years ago. Redwood City's at $25,000, started in 2015. Burlingame's at $54,000. So I definitely appreciate the concept that we are going to try to incentivize our downtown to flourish by making this parking a transition of businesses easier financially. Yet the majority of our businesses currently downtown, they're going to be okay with just the 2,500 square foot exemption. So I don't know if it's exactly needed, but my view on it, it's on the low side. I'm in favor of everything else. I'm ready to vote for everything else. I don't know if it's so important to vote today on the in lieu fees. And I guess my first question is to staff is there a rush to approve this resolution? And can we approve everything else and going forward without causing any problems?
City Manager.
So you're right. This has sort of been a long time coming, and it is comprehensive. It does address a number of factors. So getting at the first one, is it urgent to address tonight? No, we do not have anyone that with a pending application that will be impacted if there is a delay on this item. We did have the public hearing 2 weeks ago, and at the close of that public hearing, there was significant, if not unanimous, support to bring this back as fast as possible, and so staff did absolutely do that to accomplish the mission of council, which is to this is long overdue and to bring it back. What I will say about the fees, I think you are absolutely right in your characterization that most businesses will be covered by the 2,500 square foot exemption. There are new developments. There's one new development along San Bruno Avenue, and there may be a few others that have been changed recently that or may want to expand beyond 2,500 feet. And that expansion may be beneficial economically for San Bruno Avenue, and they may not meet the parking requirements. And so that's why we wanted to have reduced fees specifically geared towards downtown. And in the revision, when we looked at these between this meeting and the last meeting, we thought really hard about office. You could have an office development on San Bruno Avenue, but more importantly, within the transit corridors plan. And we did think that having the reduced fees would be leaving money on the table, so to speak, should they apply for an in lieu fee. And so that is why those that area for office in the transit corridors plan has been raised to $25,000, which is roughly around. I mean, there was one city, I think it was San Carlos, that recently upped their fee to around $25,000 or $30,000. I think that's sort of about right for office. The other uses you're primarily going to see downtown. And you're absolutely right, in lieu fees are going to help to put money in a fund to help fund a parking garage. That would be extremely helpful. The other thing that we are looking at is parking meters to help with demand management, both on-street and off-street. What our downtown parking management study revealed is that you'll drive down the street at some times and there will not be a park available. But if you turn the corner, there's tons of parking available in our lots. And so it is currently true right now that during many parts of the day, every parking space on the street will be full or nearly full, and we are not pushing people into those lots where there is free parking. And so that is one of the things that we hope to do with looking at paid parking, is to look at having paid parking on street and potentially off street. And if you have it in both, have a higher on-street rate and a lower off-street rate with signage, and we've talked about that through the plan to really push people to those lots. And so I do think the City Council, if you're willing, could act on these, and then we could see how it goes and come back and increase them at a later date. But I do think that there are businesses that have been thinking about expanding. Maybe they haven't walked through the door, but they've been thinking about expanding. And what I sort of have heard from Darcy over the last year is people sort of come in and ask the question, and they've sort of been told, no, you can't, for a long time. We don't have a pending application, but I do know that there are businesses that are looking forward to this.
Hi. Just a follow-up to that one.
Go ahead.
Marty, just really quickly.
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
I just wanted a point of clarification. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, just a point of clarification to City Manager's comment. The cost isn't being placed on the small business owner, it's being placed on the property owner? Is that, because it says here property owner on page 7 of 10, and I just want to make sure that the public is clear.
Fair.
And that I'm clear.
Sure. I think the best way to say it is that it is placed on the applicant. And that could be the property owner, that could be the business operator, they could be one and the same, or they could have a financial arrangement that is different. We really don't know, but the cost is on the applicant.
Okay, thank you.
Marty.
I have another question to staff regarding the determination of 100 square feet for a restaurant for a parking space. So that probably comes out of some book somewhere, but my question is, and I think restaurants are changing. You know, with the delivery of food, maybe you don't need as much space to have the restaurants that are currently happening, because I know the restaurants I go to, there's a lot of takeout. And so maybe you don't need that 100 space anymore, maybe you need 75. And when was that 100 square foot space last determined? You know, is it 10 years old data or what? But I was just curious about that. And another question that I have is, you know, for the downtown, there's only so many spaces now, and it's going to take a while to build a garage. So how many, is there a limit on how many, I know there's a limit on the amount, 30% that you could use in lieu fee, which is discretionary approval, right? Is there a limit on the number of spaces?
No, you're correct that the limit is a percentage of
Right.
the required off-street parking, but it is a discretionary approval.
Right, because one big restaurant could come in and say, okay, we're going to take 30%, and that 30% is 30 spaces. Well, 30 spaces at our peak hour will make it very difficult for the other restaurants, the other businesses to have those spaces, because at some point, as the city manager said, we're at 85, 90+% in parts of the different lots. Some lots are not as well known, and I'm not going to tell you where those are because that's where I park. But honestly, it's generally the bigger parking lots are behind Newell's for some reason. So anyhow, if staff could give a little bit of a response on that, and don't get me wrong, I think what we're doing is long overdue. Just that there's consequences to actions, and I'm more into this that we need to pay as we go, and we need money to build the parking structure. We need money to put in the meters, and it's a little difficult right now with our revenues. So,
City Manager.
Sure. So beginning with the last question and then backing up, I think you're absolutely right in saying that there are times where I'm actually blanking on what the question is. I'm sorry. Need meters.
how a big 30,
yes,
30
the 30%
could take the excess away. We're stuck.
So yes, that is the exact reason why the in lieu is not a fait accompli. And so it is completely discretionary. So if we do get someone that buys up a number of parcels and comes in to say, hey, I'm doing this massive development and I want to apply for a 30% waiver, that's where the staff analysis will come in and say, wait, we think that's going to be too impactful on the Ave or too impactful on El Camino Real, and that project may request it, but when they go to the Planning Commission, they may not have staff support, and we would raise that issue. And so you're absolutely right there. And there's no cap, also in part because it's based on a percentage, because we really don't know what's going to come in. We really don't know, what business is going to apply for X number of square feet. I think the other point, or the other question about 100 square feet, where that comes from, I'm going to have one of the planners, because my planning degree has never been used.
You're correct that those are from engineering manuals that estimate parking demand based on square footage. And I think I agree with what you're saying, and that's why we've tried to estimate it based on public floor area, because the makeup of these spaces really varies by the restaurant, and we don't want to penalize people who have a larger kitchen that's not going to have that much demand. It's the public floor area that's really generating the demand for the parking.
Well said. And the other part is all of these are living, breathing documents, and so we will come back and we can revise them at a later date based on data, based on how they're being used.
Okay, this will be my last question. So, if I'm looking at this chart, and if you needed 11 spaces, it would automatically go at 11 times 10,000. You wouldn't get the first spaces at 5 spaces at 25, and then the next.
If you have more than 10 spaces, the $10,000 amount applies to all spaces.
Okay.
And I'll add that, getting to your point about not capping the pure number of spaces, it's a percentage, but the sliding scale is designed to disincentivize resolution of that large parking deficit.
Okay. And I wasn't being totally honest because I have one more question. So I don't know if I read it on our staff. There's a CPI increase that goes with this ordinance and resolution tonight with these fees that it's going to be automatically increased. No, it's going to come back in a year and we're going to kind of talk about it.
Any CPI still requires council action by a resolution, but this wouldn't come back to you before July 1st, 2021, and then it would also give us an opportunity probably to give you an update on the fees and report back. And I think a lot of cities set these and then they don't adjust them. That's what I've seen. And so we just wanted to put in the resolution, the staff report, that we would be raising them with the CPI. Or we would propose to raise them with the CPI and then present that to you. Just because some cities, then they fall so far behind and then 10 years later they're thinking, oh wow, it's still $25,000. What were we doing?
And we would intend to bring this back annually when we bring back the master fee schedule, as we're looking at all of our fees together.
I was just going to comment again that I appreciate Darcy's comment earlier where I think it is let's look at this, let's move forward with this, let's come back with more data and then really reassess. Because I think right now I prefer to go with staff's recommendations or staffing consultant.
Any other questions or comments from council?
Yeah, when would this be effective if approved tonight?
So if the ordinance is introduced tonight, it comes back to the next meeting for adoption, and then it goes into effect 30 days after that. The parking design standards resolution would be effective immediately. The fees go into effect 60 days after adoption. So there is some value in acting tonight just on the fee resolution, in fact, because it's 60 days later, and you could, within the next 60 days, have someone want to come in and start the conversation about paying it. And I will say one thing, developers do like certainty. They like to know what the fees are. When they call us and we can't necessarily calculate the fee easily, it's a challenge to those developers, and it really puts the city in a tough position because we can't calculate it. So provide that clarity through adoption.
Great, thanks. And just a comment, I remember speaking with Darcy when I was on the Planning Commission, and this is one of the reasons that applications have been denied for downtown. So I agree, I echo that this has been a long time waiting. And I also want to thank staff for not just having 6 public meetings, but including them in the agenda so that the public can see how many opportunities they've had to comment. And I also appreciate that you've included the staff responses to the questions that were raised at the last meeting so it becomes part of the public record. Thank you for doing that.
Michael? Oh, you had your light on. Okay.
She's ready to introduce.
Oh, got you. Sorry. Okay. A lot of what I've felt, and Linda capitalized on a lot of it, and a few others have you had, but at the same time too, there was a lot of work that went in, and I appreciate that. And taking a page out of Mr. Hamilton, who I watched that planning commission as he was excited to see this come forward and get approval from the planning commission. But this is something that I think we do need to move forward on. I mean, it's the same thing that we had talked about, impact fees. When a former council member, Mr. Ibarra, was here, and at times things need to move forward. It is a breathing, living document. I think that it should come back at the master fee schedule, which is done annually, and that's how we ought to do it, so that it doesn't come back and gets slipped somewhere, and all of a sudden it's like, oh God, we haven't seen that in 5 years. So with that said, if there's nothing else from council, there is some actions. First, we need to have a motion and a second to waive the first reading.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? By vote voice. We also now need to introduce the ordinance.
I make a motion that we introduce the ordinance amending San Bruno Municipal Code Title 12, Article 3, Chapter 12.100, and amend Chapters 12.92, 12.96, and 12.200.
Thank you for
Second.
reading that. There's a motion made in second. Roll call.
Councilmember Davis?
Aye.
Councilmember Mason?
Aye.
Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Salazar?
Aye.
Mayor Medina?
Aye.
Motion carries.
And I believe is there still one more? There's two more. So we have to also adopt the associated parking design standards, correct? Yes.
I
Marty,
just wanted
sorry.
I wanted to introduce the resolutions, but I also wanted to make a comment that, so the developers that are out there, you better hurry up because these fees are going to go up. And things are going to get tighter here, so get those applications in, and I'd like to introduce the resolution.
Make a motion.
Make two.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Yeah, and we were going to take these one at a time, I imagine, so.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
When-
This
we
is
need a
for
vote on
the
each one.
parking design standards resolution?
Yes.
Thank you.
Second on that.
Okay, Councilmember Davis?
Aye.
Councilmember Mason?
Aye.
Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Salazar?
Aye.
Mayor Medina?
Aye.
Motion carries.
One more.
Now for the parking fee resolution.
Is there a motion?
I'll motion.
Second.
Okay, motion made and second. Roll call, please.
Councilmember
Aye.
Davis? Councilmember Mason?
Aye.
Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Salazar?
Aye.
And Mayor Medina?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Thank you, Dahl.